The stories of r/MaliciousCompliance. Penny wise, pound foolish. Years back, I worked in regional sales. My base was in Portland, but the job had me traveling to Seattle on a regular basis. We had a small branch there. It had been downsized, leaving me with the responsibility to manage their existing accounts. The business was on a long, downhill slide, but that's a story for another day. When I made these monthly or so visits, the drive was far enough that it required an overnight stay. The unspoken rule was, stay somewhere decent, but not extravagant. Knowing that the company was suffering a bit, I chose a national chain hotel that had several advantages. It was clean and safe, within walking distance of the branch office, offered a continental breakfast, and free parking. Free parking is not all that common at hotels in Seattle. We were also given a per diem for each of 3 daily meals. I chose the hotel based on the fact that I would not need a breakfast, and therefore saved the company money by staying in lodging that offered a free one. That worked well for me, because I'm not a huge breakfast eater, and when I was up there, I liked to maximize my time with branch personnel and our customers. I had to pack a lot into short, 2-day visits. On one trip, I had to get up very early in the morning to begin a particularly packed day. I skipped both breakfast and lunch altogether. I simply didn't feel that I had the time to waste. Plus, Seattle is big, traffic is bad, and often there were many miles between customers. I'd started out at 7 a.m. and finished about 6:30 p.m. I was tired, but even more famished. I went to a nice, but not overly expensive place for dinner. When I got the bill, it was about $10 more than my dinner per diem limit. I figured it was no problem, since the total was only about 10% more, and still far below the daily allowance for all 3 meals. About a week after I got back, the branch manager in Portland barked at me, "Come into my office." I hadn't a clue what I'd done wrong, but the look on his face told me he wasn't pleased. He pulls out my expense report and says, "What's this charge for dinner? You know that's more than you're allowed, right?" I think he expected me to fall on my sword and beg for mercy for having violated policy. I did the opposite. I said, "DB, please understand that I never charge for breakfast, although I could." Also on the day in question, I skipped lunch as well. So, the total, while above the limit, is still far below what I'm entitled to for daily meals. He grunted. He still wasn't happy. I continued, "I know the company is struggling. That's why I choose to stay where I stay. It's affordable, has free parking, and free breakfast. If you look back, I've never charged the company for it, and only about half the time for lunch." He knew I was right, but he decided to show me that he was the manager, and that I had to adhere strictly to the rules. Well, that's all well and good, but the per diem limits are clear, and you are never to exceed them again. I don't want to see another expense account like this on my desk ever again. Is that understood? He peered at me over his glasses with a stern grimace. I said, "Perfectly," and left his office. From that day forward, I charged the maximum allowed per diem for each and every meal. Over the next several years, it cost the company many hundreds more than it needed to, but since reason and accounting skills weren't my manager's forte, I felt more than justified for strictly adhering to the rule, and was a richer man for it. If I had $1 for each of these stories, I could afford the high-end hotels. I was thinking I could just buy a high-end hotel with all the dollars from these per diem stories. And then cater to all the people that are complying maliciously smiley face. Why bother bending over backwards to help in ways the company won't appreciate or care? You only hurt yourself by skimping by taking less than your allotted per diem allowed. I have Asperger's, which has led more than one boss to abuse my good nature. Appearing good-natured we call masking. I've had projects dumped on me with unclear directions. Aspies are very literal, so I choose what I think the project manager intends. I give plenty of warning, but I no longer agonize over what is intended. Luckily, actuaries are in short supply all. I got tired of constantly asking my manager what they wanted and then after doing what I thought they wanted having them change on me what I should have done. I email a lot now. I will be doing X, Y, and Z. If the manager doesn't like it, they'll respond with what I'm supposed to do. If they don't respond, hey, I did what I said I would. I hope you found a few places that were nice enough to give you a few blank receipts. My partner travels for business and has a credit card that gives a cash amount for breakfasts. You eat, charge it to the room, and then when you check out it's removed. You better believe that he eats his breakfast, saves his receipt from the restaurant, and turns it in for reimbursement from the company. Bad resource management. This is my first post. Hello. A company that recently fired me was under red numbers. It is a company overseas from my country that, being in South America, meant they have quite an interesting range of professionals with different aptitudes. Some managers, you could tell from a glance, they reached their position through sheer social manipulation rather than being knowledgeable and skillful. Company exports fruit all over the world. They messed up since they treated commercial offices like gods that, since they got the money from clients, they cannot do wrong. Right? Cue the container crisis. It is still up to this day. Because containers get late, fruit arrives rotten, and the company starts bleeding money. Hard. The CEO, since he notices that their financial areas are too incompetent to understand what is going on, contracts an external company to get help. Their solution? Start firing people. Our area suffers the most, especially our office. We get fired and mostly disbanded. Since we aren't an office that directly handles money, we are laid off first. They must have thought we are useless idiots. We handle documentary control and due diligence from customers. I was even one of persons that complained of the commercial office complete lack of a plan. They put all their sales on one customer, who, when rejecting the fruit, left then without option of where to sell. They fire people from areas they deem useless, like ours, whilst preserving the idiots that got us in this mess to begin with. Cue malicious firing. Their first mistake was that we received the news in a meeting. They must have thought that we were receiving a favor by telling us 2 months in advance through a Teams meeting. Never got a written letter at all. Their second mistake was how they demonstrated they cared little for the overall quality of the service offered. Their ingenious plan was to take my role and give it to the department assistant, who is paid half my salary, and suddenly she would do my job and hers without a raise. My boss then assigned the duty of training her to me, since she could bother to do things herself. What they should have seen coming was that a person with nothing to lose is not the kind of person you expect to give continuity to your important work. I never bothered to give complete training to my successor, nor did I explain about the database infrastructure I did for the company. They barely handle Excel BTW, much less a real working database on a server. She quit halfway when realizing that she did not have the professional qualification and that she was being exploited. During those 2 months, I stood mostly quiet, biding my time. HR noticed 19 days before my last day that they had to calculate my severance pay. They took me in a meeting and I told them I expected a written email, for which I would respond according to my country's laws. They never bat an eye to what I meant. Then the shitstorm started. I write back telling them that the law in my country states that all firings must be written and that until then, this was the first written document I have received. The HR supervisor was indignant. To her, I was nothing short of a leech that had received the company's goodwill by being told 2 months in advance, where it should have been 1, and that I should have been happy. I wrote to her that I didn't care. The law is the law, and they should abide by it. She escalates to the global manager, and they get ridiculed. In my country, we get free legal advice related to worker rights, and she gets shafted the final warning. Since they didn't legally give me 30 days in a written notice, they now have to pay the difference, and since we are paid bi-mensually, not by hours, it is their way to try to avoid paying extra hours. They have to pay me for the full 2 weeks, not just 11 days. It is that, or lawyer up with the Ministry of Work. The extra salary covered more than half the severance pay. I heard the director of the site got so desperate with the budget she had to remove the water machine. Lol. The cherry on top is that due to the internal dispute, I had an excuse to avoid the job that was piling up. On the system for the clients, I put all requests to be suspended until the day after I was already gone. I can only speculate as to how screwed they are with the customers. Even until my final hours I had a mountain of work and they never bothered to think that it affects their precious sales. Treating perishable goods like they are durable goods? Damn. I thought that was a really deep metaphor about how they were treating their employees. But, then I remembered this story is literally about produce law. Best sort of metaphor, works on more than one level. Does this explain why the grocery store I work at hasn't been able to have bananas in stock for the last week? LMAO. Possibly. The company I work for distributes produce to private grocers across the East Coast. We've had a slight shortage of bananas but definitely nowhere near running out. An interesting side note, the bananas we eat are endangered with extinction. There is a good chance in a few decades, enjoyment of bananas will be a thing of the past in many countries. The problem is a disease that is infecting the most common type of banana. A similar disease wiped out the most common type of banana many decades ago. Luckily, a banana was discovered that resisted the disease, and this became the banana most people eat. Unless a new kind of banana that is easily grown and distributed is discovered or produced using genetic engineering, or banana friends are losing their war. What's also worrisome is that in the West we might enjoy bananas, but in much of the third world it is a staple food for poor people. Getting rid of the compliance department for perishables? Good luck getting things cleared and legally available for sale. That is some straight-up ignorance. Not just perishables, but produce. Customs officials at the airport aren't asking random travelers if they have any fruits or vegetables as a joke. Here in New Zealand, not declaring fruit when arriving is an instant $400 fine. Then it goes up depending on what and how much it is. For scale, we found 5 bugs from Queensland, Australia in Auckland a few years back. $40 million was spent on eradication, aerial spraying. Any fruit or veggies that were passing through that area had to be fully sealed, i.e. produce trucks going down the motorway. The wrong bug can and has fricked our country before. I'm guessing Brazil, and the labor laws there are no joke. The company I work has started doing some work there and our legal team had their job cut out for them. So did HR and the engineers when they had to review resumes to find the right candidates to work there. Engineers aren't always the best at people skills, so it took them a while because of it. Because they were the ones that had the final say in hiring for the role of engineers. Sometimes I'm glad I didn't pursue an engineering role and ended up just as a draftsman. I get to play in a 3D world and make pretty drawings. Instead of figuring out if the structure I'm building will hold the equipment or crush someone. If only it were that simple. Don't make others uncomfortable. This is long, but it has to be to provide the needed details about what happened. About 10 years ago I worked in a team of scientists, which is almost enough to drop the mic right here, open mouth smile, when one day our boss told me others perceive me as contemptuous. I was shocked beyond words. I certainly did not feel superior or feel contempt for anyone. I was so flabbergasted I was silent for probably 2 solid minutes. I asked for an example of when something I had said or done gave someone that feeling. He said he couldn't divulge that information. Okay, then I asked for an example he had experienced or observed himself. He said he had none. I said, since I have no clue what I've done, how am I supposed to adjust my behavior? He said he didn't know. I said, basically then, I just need to not talk. He said he wasn't sure. I knew right then what to do. I am pretty introverted, and as a child I didn't talk for years. I rarely spoke until I was about 13 years old. Got lots of notes from teachers about how quiet I was. I would answer questions when directly asked, but rarely spoke otherwise. So, my malicious compliance in this situation was easy for me. I just stopped talking except when asked a question. I made a point of smiling, showing I was listening, nodding agreement, etc. I was extremely polite and agreeable. Pretty soon some big issues came up that I had specific knowledge about. I knew how to solve them, but no one else asked. A huge conflict came up between 2 of our labs because one group wanted it one way and the other group had a different opinion. They fought and fought. People were having secret meetings in their offices to try to win. And when they finally arrived at the action they chose, it was wrong. In fact, both groups were wrong. And the whole experiment failed. It's important to know no one was hurt, no property damage or anything like that. Just a lot of wasted time and expense on materials. But I never said a word. This went on for 3 weeks. The lab's budget had to be revised. They had to cut travel expenses, which I was okay with because I didn't want to travel anyway. So, no conferences for anyone. This is a big deal for a lot of researchers because it's how we gain notoriety to be able to get grants, among other things. Finally, a colleague asked me why I hadn't spoken for so long, why I was so quiet. Was something wrong? I explained about being told others perceive me as contemptuous. She had the same expression I did when I was told. She said she didn't believe anyone had said that about me. I honestly was surprised again because I believed our boss. Then she asked me what I thought about the experiment design and why it was failing. I told her about the solution I believed would work, which was actually surprisingly simple. She recognized it had a good chance of succeeding and asked me to share the idea at the next department meeting. At that meeting, she asked me again in front of everyone, and I repeated what I told her. Several people asked why I hadn't spoken up sooner. I explained I had been given feedback that indicated I caused others to feel uncomfortable. The whole table of colleagues also looked stunned at me. I said I was committed to not causing such bad feelings and couldn't figure out how to communicate because the feedback didn't give me any specific guidance. Everyone looked at the director at that point, and he said, "We shouldn't discuss personnel issues." It was my issue, so I said, "If anyone here perceives me as contemptuous and said as much to our boss, that's the reason I haven't been talking. If you don't feel that way about me, let me know and I will stop being silent." Someone else said we needed to hold a vote so there wouldn't be any more confusion or talking behind anyone's back. They voted 100% for me to talk normally and that they didn't agree that I was ever contemptuous. That director slowly stopped coming to work, month by month after this episode, until he was only showing up 1 day a week. Finally, he took a lab position elsewhere and one of my colleagues was promoted to director. And the experiment was a success. The next year I got a grant to keep the research going and paid for 2 people to be able to travel to the related conference to present our findings. Whenever I had a performance review with any negative stuff, I always asked for specifics. Most often there was none, and the source was confidential. My consistent response was that I could not address something that was vague and unattributed, and, strangely enough, the next review had nothing about it. One time my review was ghost-written by a manager because my boss, the VP, delegated it. The actual writer got many things wrong, both positive and negative. I escalated it to my boss rescinded the review and disciplined the writer. Later on, when I managed people, I learned from this and made sure my employees' reviews were honest, specific, and actionable, to reinforce positives and address negatives. Not just review time, either. I made sure to pull people aside as things happened so it was fresh and we could talk about it and plan how to handle it better in the future. Frick all the terrible bosses. That's the thing, it is a horrible feeling to find out you screwed something up 4 months ago, or that your boss has been unhappy with how you're doing for most of the year. If you find out right away, you can make immediate changes and everyone is better off. You sound like a good and decent manager. It didn't happen often, but one thing I never appreciated was hearing about something negative the first time in a review that occurred weeks or months earlier. It is important to discuss whatever the negative thing as soon as a MGR is aware of it. Ideally, then by the time the review comes around, if the negative is noted, there is information as to the positive steps that were taken, that it was resolved. 1000% agree. The performance review is never a time to spring news on someone, unless it's a bonus to thank them for their contributions. I got to do that 1 year. It was fun. I always deal with problems when they happen and make a plan with the employee to fix the issue. I was let go from a horse barn because they wanted someone with more experience. At that time I had been working with horses for about 6 years and the job was just basic care. When I asked what I could do to improve, they just repeated the more experience thing. I told them, more professionally, that was bullshit because they were actively employing others who had little to no experience. Never heard anything else back. Sounds like they were trying to hire someone they know and just made up an excuse. How frustrating. For sure, they ended up cleaning house after they fired the last manager and hired all new people at a lower rate. Oh wow, then maybe it's good you didn't end up working there. The typical outcome for workers like us is we get better jobs and we contribute well. Our employers gain from it. So, the ones we leave ultimately lose out. Had something similar happen to me when I was an apprentice. The boss called me into his office to tell me that the female apprentice was uncomfortable being in the same room as me. I pointed out that the only time I interacted with her was when we played poker during our lunch breaks, then asked what I'd done to make her uncomfortable. He couldn't tell me. He also had no idea who had actually made the complaint or who it had been made to. I think your boss should have told her to talk to you about it instead of talking to you about some vague complaint. If someone ever made me feel uncomfortable, I'd tell them. I think it's wrong to complain behind someone's back, with the exception of something like outright harassment. But, making me uncomfortable, what even does that mean? It's better for the people involved to talk directly to one another. When someone complains to me about someone else, I ask if they have talked about it. I expect them do so and let me know if the situation doesn't resolve. That's the thing, I am completely certain that she never said anything. I know it was a couple of the other apprentices making shit up to try to get me in trouble. I think the boss realized that during our chat. You will address me by my new name. I once worked for the second most toxic man I have ever known. This was a small business of him, the owner, myself, and my long-suffering colleague. So he was in complete control with no one to report to. My boss was an absolute manchild who would launch into hours-long absolute fits of pant-soiling fury over the smallest inconvenience, and then as soon as his problem was solved would act frustrated and sulky that we weren't all celebrating his victory. He would have these tantrums several times a week. Our shop was on a high street. I felt bad for our business neighbors having to put up with it. It's only now, years later, I remember we had student flats above us as well. When my boss wasn't risking detonating his own nads into a fine red mist of rage, he was otherwise insufferable. He would also frequently get hyper and giddy and make fun of us, lost in a fit of giggles while calling us nonces. Or he would decide that some new form of honors should be bestowed on him, like we should be made to call him Sir, or Master, or Darth. Seriously, imagine a man that has never in his life held a stick or pole without swinging it around making lightsaber noises. Once day he decides we are to call him Daddy Cool. We argue and resist and ************ at him, but he is insistent that we are to all refer to him henceforth as Daddy Cool. I step away from the insanity to take my lunch in the basement. I chill a little and my own anger settles to weary resignation. Dangerous, perilous, weary resignation. I climb the steps from the basement. I burst through the door and bellow in my stage voice, Daddy Cool. Customers are in the shop being tended to by my boss. I ignore them. My colleague crumples into hysterics, gasping OMG between breaths. We have run out of XYZ, Daddy Cool. We should order some of UVW also, Daddy Cool. I address him as Daddy Cool for days until he's like, okay, alright, that's enough. Actually, no. I continue to refer to him as Daddy Cool well beyond him begging me to stop. And several more times as necessary over the years when a reminder is necessary. Asking the question that will be on everyone's mind. Why did you stay in this job? Someone like that grinds you down to nothing. I had serious depression and anxiety as a result of working for him. You end up in a survival mode state of mind. How to avoid the next outburst, how to stay quiet and out of the way. You don't think about improving your situation or how you deserve better. I stayed 5 years until I was offered a job unsolicited by one of our customers. If it hadn't have been for that kind of rescue deal, I would have stayed under that abuse years longer. My colleague stayed 10 years until the company went bankrupt. Hey up. Just wanted to say I'm glad you made it, and based on how you write about it, I'm gonna guess that to the extent you have power over people, you use it very differently from how this boss did. To a kind person, that may seem like a low bar, but I've watched kind people get bullied, lose their kindness, and then become bullies themselves. I just wanted to say how kick-ass it is that you have bucked that trend. So, yeah, feel your feelings and work through what you need to. Just don't forget that you're out of there, you're safe, and you're already winning by not repeating that boss's errors. TLDR. You're doing it right, and you're going to make it. Thank you for saying that. I didn't buck the trend. Unfortunately, I became an absolute misanthrope for many years. I did become a bully myself and take out my pain on others. I was able to move past it, though only after several years, and the start of daily panic attacks forced me to re-evaluate my life and mental health. That sparked a complete rebuild of who I was and needed to become. I'd a similar situation, working in hospitality, under a manager who insisted on being addressed as Your Greatness, and any reference to him should be of the Great One. It finally got knocked on the head when a speaker at a conference, with a similar sense of humor to my own, would abruptly pause when said manager entered the back of the room, e.g. to check coffee stations had been arranged properly ahead of a break, and make the entire audience, 200 plus people, and chant in a religious tone, all hail to the Great One for he is so wise, and invite him to the podium to impart his wisdom. That is comedy gold. I love that speaker. Same, I doubt I could have gotten a chant going. You have made it to the end, so you should probably give this a like and consider subscribing as well. It's free, you know.